Welcome. It's International Women's Day tomorrow. This is our event to rake over how far we've come and maybe more so how far we have to go. Thank you all very much for coming. And thank you particularly to the men, because of course our issues ultimately are your issues too. So thank you all very much indeed for coming. International Women's Day has been celebrated since 1910. I was quite surprised by that. And then the original countries who celebrated were Switzerland, Denmark, Germany, and Austria, I believe.
Russia
as well, believe it or not. So it's been going for quite a long time, hasn't it, in various forms, but it's really now an international event. And this year, for instance, 100 years since some women in the UK got the vote. Some women, I say, not everyone. Of course, New Zealand was way before the Brits. Today, we've just heard of there being a new kind of Barbie doll, which is representative of real women, women who've achieved things, women who are in sport and even in aviation. So this is something, I suppose, that constitutes progress, but there's still a huge amount to go. Gender parity when it comes to pay in the workplace. I mean, that's appalling, as you probably have heard in Britain, one of the major issues at the moment. But here in the Middle East, I think we've got a slightly different take on International Women's Day, different issues that we're going to try and explore today. So may I then introduce our panel. We've got a stellar cast here, starting with Noor Al-Malki Al-Jahani, who's here. Executive Director of Doha International Family Institute, or DIFI. She's a member of the Qatar Foundation for Education, Science and Community Development, which promotes knowledge of the Arab family, and she served as the Secretary General for the Supreme Council for Family Affairs. Noor has taken part in numerous initiatives to further the rights of women, and she's contributed to national strategies and legislation through her work. So she's got really good experience of both of advocacy as well as policy making. Next to Noor, we have Shia Abu Al Kiya, who's an Egyptian journalist and human rights advocate. She's served as communications advisor to Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ. As I say, she's a communications expert, and she has a long track record of activism. 2013, she secured a victory at the African Commission on Human Rights against the Egyptian government. This is quite an amazing victory. It took a long time, but well done. This was regarding violence against female journalists at a demonstration that took place in 2005. Currently, Shia is a journalist with Al Arabi Television in London. Then we have Maha Greer, who is a project officer in the Day After, a very interesting organization that works towards a democratic transition in Syria. She also runs a Syrian women's survivors group, the women who've been detained in Syria. They have a very, very different experience after their detention, once they're released, and Maha will be able to tell us a lot about that. Then we have Beverly Milton-Edwards, who's Professor of Politics at Queen's University in Belfast and visiting fellow at Brookings Doha, a prolific author, her latest being Contemporary Politics in the Middle East, the 4th edition. That's just been published. And Beverly specializes in security sector governance in the Middle East, conflict management, the Muslim Brotherhood, to name just a few. Then Maya Amar, a Lebanese independent feminist activist. She writes on feminist issues, and she offers training sessions on gender awareness. And she's formerly worked with a very well-known Lebanese NGO called Kafa. When I mentioned that, some Lebanese friends of mine knew it immediately, and that means enough. And that works to end violence and exploitation. And she's worked closely with journalists, haven't you? Yeah. So this is our panel. Our ladies are going to make their contribution in a small statement, about 7 minutes long, and then we'll have a conversation, and then each of you in the audience are welcome to contribute. So if you could then put up your hands, give us an idea of who you are, which organization you come from, and then hopefully we can get an interesting debate going. So we'll start then with Noor.
Good evening and happy Women's Day to everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the Brookings Center for this invitation. I'll be talking briefly or reflecting on the impact of the Arab Spring on women's rights in the region. 7 years after the Arab Spring, the situation of women in the region appears to be more complex, but also more promising. This is an opportunity today for us to take stock and evaluate objectively the impacts and the dynamics of these uprisings as they relate to Arab women. I'd like first to start by reminding ourselves why we had the Arab Spring in the first place. The causes of the Arab Spring were very diverse. They included social justice, human rights violations, declines of economy in the countries that had the uprising, as well as high unemployment rate and poverty. Women joined the movements from the start. They were part of the struggles that overthrew 4 of the most deeply rooted regimes in the region. The quest for Arab women were not different from those of men. Arab women demanded social justice, dignity, and democracy. Their human rights as citizens and women were embedded in these goals. The quest within that context was a quest for women's rights. Now, a lot of people talk about the Arab Spring victimizing women. The impacts of the Arab Spring on women have been controversial, where some people emphasize they did open more room for women in the public sphere. Others highlighted the adverse outcomes on the gains women made over the years. Many have argued that the participation of women in public spheres, movements, and the sense of empowerment they experienced came with an expensive price tag. They were subjected to violence and systematic harassment in a bid to undermine the legitimacy of their agency and the legitimacy of the uprising as a whole. That being said, however, as far as the Arab Spring is concerned, I see no winners. The whole Arab region was transformed and turned upside down. Think of Syria, think of Iraq, think of Libya and Yemen. Some changes and ideas that were introduced during this period are indeed very harmful to women's rights. For example, the Iraqi parliament recently rejected a proposal to allow some religious sects to marry girls as young as 8 years old. Now, indeed, it's very simplistic to see only the empty half of the cup and ignore the full part to say that the Arab Springs victimized women and just stop at that. I'd like to argue that the Arab Spring empowered women. It enhanced women's agency, the ability to make decisions and the ability to voice demands and to act on them. In short, the Arab Spring empowered women to exercise their rights. It increased civil engagement and empowered civil society. True, women have endured violence and atrocity, but they fought back. Many women were sexually harassed, assaulted, and raped at these violations, revolutions. Others paid with their prices, with their lives. Having said that, many of these women fought back. Women activism continued beyond the marches in the public squares. Despite the violence and the trauma inflicted upon women, a new dawn for women in the region emerged and continued to unfold. Now, I argue that women were central to the Arab Spring. I also argue that this movement did not only victimize women, they revived their roles and positions in society. The collective action undertaken by women across the divide during this uprising bestowed them with a new sense of empowerment and gave them a visible presence and powerful voice that cannot be taken away from them. Some activists actually became iconic figures and pride to their nations. Let's remember Tawakkul Kurman from Yemen, who won the Nobel Prize. Many countries enacted measures to improve women's condition following the uprising. We have to remember as well that the transition in the Arab region are still works in progress. So it's not, the situation is still fluid. Women and other women's rights groups should continue to mobilize. They should continue to advocate and lobby in support of their demands, which include taking measures to protect women from violence, whether occurring in public or private sphere. This does not mean that the long-standing challenges to women's advancement are now over. On the contrary, I see that we have new challenges, like mitigating the potential impact of conservative terrorist politics on women's hard-gain ones. Indeed, security issues are one of the most significant challenges that women are facing and still facing. Policymakers are urgently required to come up with policies to combat extremist ideology, modernize and implement family codes, secure more legal and social protection for women, like services for sexual and gender-based violence. There are many lessons to be learned and experiences to build upon. The level of violence inflicted on women in the uprising, combined with an attempt to sideline women's agenda in the post-uprising, indicate that gender discrimination still prevails in the Arab region, as it is elsewhere. Experiences from around the world illustrate that violence against women have become a means to an end and a tool to exercise control over society. The lessons learned within this context is that demands for bread, for freedom, for social justice, if not associated with discourses aimed at achieving gender equality, the goals of revolution, any revolution, will remain tricky and elusive. The unprecedented participation of women in the street protests could have been translated into vibrant political representation that articulate their rights and agenda, had they organized themselves, built alliances and partnerships, and became united around a minimum agenda. To support the advancement of women's rights in the Arab region, Arab governments should renew their commitment to fully implement the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, a convention that most Arab countries have ratified, and to harmonize national legislations with international human rights instruments.
Okay, no, we have to hurry you along now.
Last sentence.
Okay.
Women and human rights organizations in the region and globally should continue to use this important international instrument to promote human rights. I'm done. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. So glass half full, glass half empty, but no, they're emphasizing what the gains were from the Arab uprisings that sadly have not yet materialized into substantial gains for women and women's rights, but something to work with.
Agency. The improved agency and empowerment of women, the voice of women is what we gained from the Arab Spring.
Great stuff. Shaima, can we ask you now? Yes.
No. So first, thank you, Martin, for introducing me.
I would like to thank Brookings Center for inviting us, especially that we are meeting with you here. I'm going to... In fact, we usually, in the International Day for Women, we speak about the rights of women and what women gained and their achievements in the past years, and what are the things that we can achieve or look forward to achieve. But in fact, more often we forget on this day to speak about the women who work in the field of defending the rights of women. We sometimes forget to know what those activists about human rights and women's rights are doing and their struggle. And in fact, not only those who work on this field, that's to say in defending women's rights, we also forget some other examples from women in the society that we should know their problems and their difficulties because they work in calling for equality, gender equality, and legal on the legal basis, on the social or cultural basis. The speakers on this panel are all those activists, but they have all come today to speak about women's rights in their societies. But I think that maybe in my intervention, I will be speaking about the problems that we are facing as women activists and calling for women's rights, because of and how much we suffer every day in playing our role. I've come from London to take part with you. I would have wished I could come from Cairo, but I'm coming from London because I have a self-imposed exile to live outside my country because of the oppression that women and women activities are facing in Egypt or have been facing in the recent years. A lot of the women and organizations who work in defending women's rights in Egypt have been attacked in a systematic way and by the authorities because they defend human rights and insist to call for equality and equal rights between men and women. Defending and speaking about human rights, whether by women or by men, is something that drew the attention of all the world about 20 years ago, and that's why an international world declaration was made in 1990 by the General Assembly of the United Nations, which classifies those who work in the field of defending human rights in categories: those who work in legal organizations and journalists, and even those who work in factories and in offices, but call for the equal rights. Most of the defenders of human rights are, especially in the Arab region and more particularly after the Arab Spring and the different revolutions that were seen in the different countries. All these countries have been faced by a lot of oppression by the authorities. The women movement work on the issues that are important for women, such as physical attacks and sometimes even rape, as cases that took place in Egypt. And also we will often speak about the legal enablement or empowerment of women. And at the same time, there are the institutions and those who defend women's rights are also facing a lot of pressure and oppression. In fact, a lot of women work in societies and associations to defend the rights of women are very much oppressed and or have been banned from traveling, or they found their properties confiscated because they defend human rights and women's rights. The latest violations that we revealed, Noor Maliki spoke about the violations against women as a result of the Arab Spring, but most of these violations were physical ones, and in fact this was particularly seen in Egypt in 2011, in the first anniversary of Women's Day, where a big number of women were arrested by the authorities in 2011, and these women were badly physically treated, and their bodies were violated, and after the 25th of January 2011, this Egyptian authorities not only had something new they have begun doing after 2011. No, in fact, this is a systematic policy that they had adopted since 2005 by attacking and systematically targeting women who take part in political demonstrations against the authorities at Mubarak's time. A big number of women journalists and activists were physically attacked, including being raped. I was one of these women journalists that were attacked, and one of the activists of women there that's why we have presented a case to the African Organization for the Rights of Peoples, whose decrees and resolutions are not binding, but this committee adopted a resolution in 2005 to condemn the Egyptian Authority about this issue. In 2013, and in light of the coming to power a new authority after the 2011 revolution, but in the deep state of Egypt, there is a lack of respect to women's rights, even legal rights, and that's why we find that these violations and these practices continue to take place against women. أنت تطلب منها
Again, that very it's dangerous. It's dangerous being a woman. It's dangerous being a woman activist, and the shadow of violence, sexual violence, is hanging heavily over the whole conversation, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Maha, let's go to you now, because I know that you've got a particularly interesting story as well, particularly dealing with the Syrian conflict and women who've been detained. And so tell us about your experiences.
أول شيء حابة أتشكركم على هاي الدعوة وسعيدة بوجودي معكم اليوم. بصراحة كلامي خصوصا إنه قعدت بعد نور إنه كلامي مكمل للكلام والأفكار اللي كانوا عم يحكوها بشكل كتير كبير. أنا حالياً عم بشتغل على تنسيق مجموعة للناجيات.
First of all, I would like to thank you. I'm very happy to be working with you here because I'm working with a number of women who have been detained and were able to overcome the difficulties. They were detained in the different prisons of the Syrian regime. During the Syrian revolution, we have seen an increase in the number of women who have taken part in the revolution. So many of them have taken place in those revolutions, and the repression by the regime and the number of detentions, rapes, and so on and so forth. We have seen women being victimized as a result of that, and afterwards we have seen the rise of a number of extremist groups who have also assaulted women as a result of that. That is why women have seen how the price is very high and very dear. That is why it was very important to have this group. The objective of this group is to voice the concerns of those women. We do not call them victims, but these people who were able to make it, who were able to rescue themselves and be survivors of those wars, because there is no justice that can be a real justice if does not include real justice, the justice of all those victims who have fallen during that crisis. So the main objective of this kind of group is to give security to those women, to give them space where they can express themselves. When women leave the detention center, their experience is different. I'm not saying that it is an experience that is harsher or less harsh, but it is different. So the impact of this experience after detention is different altogether. So there are so many women say that men, when they are in prison, they become freedom fighters, they become heroes. But women, they ask different questions. They don't become heroes or freedom fighters. They asked her, what have you made? What have you done for you to be detained as a result of that? So this is not just the only thing. We're not talking only about social pressure. There is another impact because some of them are deserted by their own members of their families. Some women are subjected to divorce. Some of them also lose their own children. They're deprived of their own children. So the violations are not... The violation is compounded when the women leave detention because they are deprived of their own families and particularly their children. I do not want to generalize, but we have so many of such cases in our experience. I would like to talk about two experiences in the day after in the Sidnaya group that deals with the experience of the experience of the survivors in the Sidnaya group. We have the two groups that have started with us, but we have seen the development in the Sidnaya group, which was much quicker. They have achieved the strides as a result of their efforts. This is testimony to the impact of those violations on women. It impedes their movements. So I would like to conclude by one last point. When it comes to freedom of women, freedom is very important indeed. Freedom is part and parcel of human rights in general. And this movement is not only caring about the rights of women. This feminist movement is in solidarity with all rights, the rights of all people in the whole world. That is why, if you allow me, I would like to refer to a point that is relevant to what is taking place in Syria today. I have taken a pledge that anywhere I go, I should mention this. I apologize, he says. I have to say what is taking place in Ghouta. Ghouta is being under siege for 18 days now. We have seen women, children, and men equally being targeted and killed. This is something that we have. All of them are being equal when it comes to killing. My message here, please rescue and save Ghouta.
Thank you very much indeed. That chimes in a great deal, of course, with the coverage we at Al Jazeera are engaging in on an hourly basis, the plight particularly of the people in Eastern Ghouta at this moment. So thank you very much for that. Beverly, over to you. And just a reminder that Beverly's latest book is just published, Contemporary Politics in the Middle East, the 4th edition, I believe. Yeah. So that is unmissable, I'm sure. And there'll be an official launch quite soon, I think.
Thank you. It's a little bit difficult to follow our other speakers who address the challenges and the issues that women in the region face, and that they've addressed them so eloquently. And also, we have a very short period of time, so you'll be pleased to know that I was going to make, well, I started off earlier today thinking I could make about 7 points. Then I sat here and decided at the beginning of the session I would make 5 points. And then after the speakers, I decided I'd make 4 points. But please be assured, I'm only going to make 2 points. And I'll try and be as brief as possible. Those 2 points are general. The first is about marginalization and the experience of marginalization that women face in the region. I will generalize, but in generalizing, I'm going to rely on a number of facts. Of course, it's important to recognize that in the long term, we have seen, in terms of issues of marginalization, that there has been some gains and progress for women in the region, particularly when they're measured against UN development goals. We see that there have been gains, for example, important gains for women in the field of education and life expectancy. But what we also know is that those gains are not doing enough to close the gender gap for women and girls in this part of the world. In terms of the gender gap, we're looking at indices of economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, political empowerment. And when we look at the region, we see that in the latest report produced in 2017 by the World Economic Forum, that of the 15 worst countries, 10 of them were from this region. Now, if we just take one dimension of that gender gap, the economic dimension, the facts speak for themselves. This region generally exhibits dismal rates of female employment right across the region. Jordan, for example, has only 12% of women in employment, Lebanon 20%, and Egypt 17%. Interestingly enough, only Qatar reflects OECD levels, with 49% of women in employment. And overall, as the World Bank informs us, just over 25% of women are employed or actively looking for work in the region. Now, the reasons are myriad. Social and cultural and other structural barriers exist to prevent and work against young women in particular from achieving and transforming the opportunities gained by progress in education into mobility, into labor, into employment. So not only are they not employed, but these women also experience deep marginalization, which has huge costs for societies and economies all over the Middle East and North Africa. I think that the unemployment rate, in particular for young Arab women, should in fact be a clarion call across the region for action to unlock potential, to help the region grow. Because if women are in employment, it's good for economies of the entire region. And in fact, IMF and World Bank modeling suggests that if women were incorporated into the economies of the region, there would be growth in the trillions. By excluding women, the whole of the region holds itself back. Of course, one of those explanations relates to the political environment in which women in the region, and this brings me to my second point, which I will try and be also brief about. Again, we can applaud the formal gains that have been made in political systems for women. We can see that as a result of movements in terms of electing women to legislatures, there have been gains from 3.8% in 2000 to 12.8% in 2013. Yet more women are needed to be represented, not just in legislatures across the region, but in all kinds of forums of decision-making, from the local to the regional to the national and the international. Quotas have been good news for women. I know it's controversial, but they have played a part in getting women onto party lists, onto candidate lists, and across the threshold and into parliaments. Of course, the work within parliament needs to carry on. Women need to not only be empowered through incorporating them into what are described as traditional legislative areas or zones for women, such as social development or women's rights, but there should be opportunities provided, and opportunities should be encouraged for women to play a role in all aspects of national decision-making. After all, they're a demographic reality. They're part of the very fabric of societies and nations across the region, whether those nations are stable or fragile or engulfed by conflict. And as we've heard so powerfully explained today, women are victims, along with men, of instability and conflict in this region. So governments, in closing, governments need to be more proactive, beyond national plans and symbolic gestures. Governments need to make visible spaces for women. They need to allocate resources for women. It's not enough just to introduce national plans that incorporate women. Data on women produced by governments need to be disaggregated so that we know that resources can be put in the right ways and in the right places. Gender mainstreaming should and must become a reality. You know, in the political space, courageous women and girls have played a pivotal role. Again, as we've heard, Noor explained the pivotal role, the voice of women, in shaping the forces and the Arab uprisings of 2011. And women today across the region continue to play that pivotal role. It should be a duty of men and women and government and leaders, national, local, and in the community, to support these women. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And finally then, we come to Maya Amar from Lebanon.
مرحبا.
Good evening. I know that we are here 6 women sitting on the podium. In this context, some would say a panel with 6 women. This is a large number of women, but perhaps because this is International Women's Day, maybe in other contexts or in other topics, if we see 6 women, we would ask, where are men? 6 experts. We're used to seeing 6 male experts because we still think that the presence of women is exceptional, is something that comes as an emergency. And there is a question that is being posed on us as activists, women activists. They ask us, do you have men with you in your group? Do you have men with you in your association? Are there men that support you? And this question that disturbs us a little bit, and I'm going to try to talk about it outside the limited women's circle, because I would like to deliver this point to you. This question, because we have a critical view vis-à-vis this point, particularly a number of feminist women. We have a certain kind of a thorny vision vis-à-vis such a matter. First of all, I really like the description of Simone de Beauvoir. They say that the strife of women is very difficult. It is not a group of women against a repressive group. Women are not a minority. No, we live side by side with the side with the master or the one that represses women. We are used to the master and oppressed living together. And there is no dissociation between the two. So we live together day in, day out. We live with men day in, day out. But this matter of living together, is it a fluid? Is it a secure kind of living? Is it comfortable? No, it is not. Why? Because it is a probable, possible kind of repression. And if the man goes beyond such an idea, there are some things that come from the past because of this patriarchal kind of inheritance that they have. Even men who try to liberate themselves from such kind of thinking would still have some residue of those ideas. So we want to get away, to run away from this kind of discrimination, violence that is being exercised on us by men, to create our own spaces. We do not want to be subjected to harassment. We do not want to be silenced by the other. That is why we resort to this secure or safe zone. So that is why we want to carry out and express this case. So it is not easy for some women to join if they wish to join some of the groups. So if some women join us, they're going to lose a number of kind of privileges. So let's be frank, there is a real battle that is being fought. We're talking about gender justice. So all freedom battles that Shema talked about and that include the strife of women. Are the people who have this privilege, are they going to be willing to lose their privileges? All men should ask themselves and pose these questions to themselves before they decide to support us. So men, they are available in all spheres of life, in the decision-making processes, in the public sphere they are available and present, in the different positions, in commerce, in all high decisions or high posts, they are available. So, do they want to extra control our own kind of rights? Is this what we want? Do they still have to have more space or more seats, more crowns or thrones? I want to go back to Simone de Beauvoir. We cannot dissociate ourselves as men and women. We cannot stop working together. They need to support us. They need to know that our causes are a priority. Yes, it is a matter of structure, of community, of society. It is not just a women's cause because we have been subjected to violence. This is on the one hand. They have to understand also that listening to the proposals of women, they have to listen to them because they have to take us seriously, because they always have this tendency to decide, because this is how they've been brought up, not because they are bad by nature. And this kind of tendency to control because of this cultural kind of education, I think they should make some concessions. And this is not something easy to be made. But here, it becomes difficult on us as women because we have to have or exert compounded effort because we have our own issues, the violence that we are subjected to as women. And we have other issues that we want to transform and change. We have so many issues, so many things, so many injustices that we are subjected to. So do we have to tell men how you should behave? You should not practice any harassment against me. You should not cut me when I'm speaking. You have to hear me out. So we have to have initiatives with men in the region. And it is time, the UN said that it is time for men to take part and work with women. And we have started with the He for She campaign. I do not know whether you know with this campaign, لأجلها in Arabic, He for She. And we have reached in the campaign that because he is man, so the slogan, because he is man, he should not hit a woman. He should not batter a woman. So there are a number of associations in Algeria, Tunisia, Lebanon. They wanted to push forward a discourse for this strife to be legitimate. It does not necessarily need to have a man in the middle. So does it mean if we're all women, does it mean that our strife is not going to be legitimate? Should it be man-based? Because if men do not batter women, is it because they have high morals and they are good enough? No. The discourse of the United Nations in this matter, there is an agenda that is being imposed in order to keep going. So we are pushing our agenda in order to restudy, revisit these concepts of masculinity, in order to break this kind of trends that we have, these stereotypes that we have. I think there is a contradiction between the global kind of discourse that is being imposed on us and what we want to have as women. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. So really interesting contributions from our guests. And one question, really pressing question, strikes me, and I wanted to know what your thoughts were on this. There's been so much said about the Me Too campaign, Time's Up campaign. It seems to have gone around the world. It seems to have empowered women in a way that perhaps we haven't seen before. How does this translate into the Middle East, and has it had any kind of resonance for the women that you're talking about from your various countries? No, get me, you first.
Yeah, and I'll speak in Arabic. Okay.
The world is witnessing a lot of action taken by women to try to present their issues to the public by a number of campaigns in which women speak about their issues. We found that in USA Me Too campaign, for example, which is about women being harassed. So a woman said that she was harassed or attacked, but nobody responded with her. But when everybody says what happened to them as women, there will be more people to listen to them. These kinds of campaigns, I think they are not useful, will not be useful in the Arab world because of the specificity of the Arab world. And what was said by Maya, the Arab world has a sort of cultural issue about women because they link women to honor. And even when she is detained and she is being raped, she still to be a victim and she is rejected. This is the culture we have. So when a woman is detained, when she comes after the prison, she is considered to be not a victim, but not to be somebody that to be blamed. And I'd like also to speak about the point raised by Maya about men and women. Are we in a continuous animosity between men and women? I think it is necessary for us in our defending women's rights. We should not deal with men as the enemy. The culture we have has given different roles to men and women in our societies, and it's high time to change this.
All the attitudes.
We need to change the cultural attitudes. This is very important. The culture, the stereotypes need to be changed. And these stereotypes are reinforced by governments. And this is where it's reinforced in public speaking, in government speech, it's reinforced in education. All this has to change. And going back to the issue of men and women, the he for she, it's very important that we speak to men. Men are not our enemies. And I would like to say, to quote as well, the new study by UN Women on men and masculinities, which showed that only 0.25% of the men who were surveyed, and this is the biggest survey that was ever done. It's 10,000 men. Only 0.25% supported gender equality, and unfortunately, most of women as well did not support gender equality. But it said something very important. It said when the man in the family supports gender equality, it makes a big impact. And I would like to say that in our experience in Qatar, okay, in my experience and the experience of many women, the empowerment comes from the support of the parents in the family. The role of the father is very important. And when the father is the leader of the country, this makes a huge impact. And in Qatar, I would say that we owe a lot of the empowerment we have as women to the role played by the father, Amir Sheikh Hamad. I've been in the scene 20 years following all this. He changed the country by example. And I will give two examples actually. Okay. And I'll say one example when there was a picture of His Highness at the time attending the graduation of his daughter, Sheikha Mayasa, and we all know Sheikha Mayasa. And that was in the paper. That was the first paper of a father attending the graduation of his daughter in our country. And look at the newspapers now. It's all fathers standing proudly with their daughter. Another example, and I was at the time at the Supreme Council for Family Affairs, and we did a study at the time. We said, there are no pictures of women in the newspapers. How do we encourage more women to appear in the newspapers? The moment Her Highness appeared in the newspaper, and she was with His Highness. Now look at the newspapers in Qatar. All of us have the courage and to speak, to stand up here and to stand up everywhere. It's the empowerment. So His Highness was the leader and the father as well. He gave the example, and this is why the role of fathers is extremely important. This is why role modeling is very example, and engaging with men. We're not enemies. We need to discuss. We need to understand as well. In our region, men have their issues. We have the highest unemployment rate in the world. We need to understand why the violence is increasing. We have...
Can I just butt in there, Noor, and ask you to hold that thought, because I know Maha would like to interject at that point. Go, Maha.
Okay. بالنسبة لحملة ميتو أو كتير
to Me Too campaign and any other similar campaigns that we see in the Arab world, this is very good indeed, because it reveals the size of the problem that we're facing. When we had #MeToo, all girls and ladies that I know on Facebook and those that I don't know, all of them have written on their own experiences when it comes to harassment. And this was a shock to their surrounding. They were saying, is it true that the problem is that big? They were thinking that maybe harassment only women who are weak are subjected to, not women who can work and who can go out and take to the streets. So the first thing, it revealed the size of the issue and the problem, and we have seen a new kind of discussion taking place between the members of the community, men and women alike. So when we started talking about this problem, I think that such campaigns from time to time can give some positive impacts with time. شيماء وبعد ذلك I would like to say that Me Too campaign is one of the most important international campaigns that we have seen so far that supports women in their long strives, that allow them to talk about physical assaults that they are subjected to. The Arab culture in its strife, and some men, some Arab conservative communities, they insist all the time to deprive women from having the right to work, to drive cars, to take part and participate in the political life. So it is always this patriarchal kind of move, this masculine move to protect the body of women, for it not to be subjected to any harassment or assaults. So all women in all Arab communities and societies, although they have been subjected to this kind of preservation, this kind of move into being so much pious and religious, whether as Muslims or Christians, all of them have been subjected to these assaults. Women continuously are not able to express it out. So this campaign was an electronic campaign. That is why so many women were able to dare to talk. We have seen different forms of harassment in the streets, at home, even at home within the family are subjected to harassment and sexual assaults and rapes. And this is one of the things that we do not talk about. But what has happened in this campaign, and I think was very successful in my opinion, this campaign at its beginning concentrated on talking about physical harassment that women are subjected to at the workplace. And this campaign started from the West with very renowned and known personalities. They started talking about that, and this encouraged so many women to start talking and voicing the assaults and violations that are subjected to. So in Egypt, this campaign was very successful indeed. We have seen a number of women groups that have been formed just to rub shoulders with this kind of campaign and to monitor the different violations that have taken place. Also, we have had a number of Google documents, electronic documents that have been exchanged, where they exchanged the names of a number of public figures and a number of famous people, social and artistic or artists and political figures who
shared with, they're being shared between different women. Will they ever be held to account in Egypt?
We here face a problematic issue, is that the Egyptian law does not give any legal guarantees to women for them to be able to get their rights through the courts or legal procedures. Any woman that would go to the police station in which she can talk or file a kind of a case of harassment, she's going to be subjected to physical and verbal assaults. For her not to go ahead with her case and not to forward the assailant equivalent to the judicial authorities. But what was successful in the public sphere is that a number of public figures who have been condemned in these cases, we have seen a number of civil societal committees of politicians and human rights activists to investigate in a number of cases that have been divulged. And in one of the cases, the person who was accused of harassment, he said it and confessed publicly and apologized, and he was disowned in actual fact. And there are a number of other cases where another public figure whose name was revealed, he was accused of assaults, and investigations were between accusing him or not accusing him. So because this movement till date has still in need of having a number of accurate definitions to differentiate between harassment and assault and so on and so forth. But these campaigns are very successful indeed, and women should take part in these campaigns, not necessarily reveal their names, but when women talk about these problems, this alleviates the level of burden that they have on them.
Maya, what's the situation like in Lebanon? How does a newly vocal generation of women, how does that impact upon the legal framework, for instance? Is it changing the way those who are found guilty, or at least who are accused of inappropriate sexual behavior, is there any sort of recourse for the accuser?
للأسف لا بلبنان مثل كتير دول عربية.
Fortunately, no. And Lebanon, as in many other countries, there is no accountability for people for harassment, sexual harassment. The difference between us and the Western countries is not that they don't have this culture of blaming the victim. This is something that exists all over the world. So sometimes they do, but this happens in our country and countries and there. But the difference that in the West they have good legal procedures that can bring to accountability the people who harass others, and also there is this heavy religious heritage that we have in the region that bans us or does not let us to speak about against any hierarchical power. And in Lebanon, there's also, in fact, a margin of liberty or freedom more than other countries that at least allows us in the media to speak more frankly. But on the political level, there is sort of stalemate, and our politicians are very much afraid to work in this field, and have so far not been able to vote for a law against sexual harassment. Me Too, but Me Too gave it a big impetus to this issue. But nevertheless, we find this harassment did take place in Egypt, and there's the Salwa adventures in Lebanon. But thanks to you, there is a very good momentum now, and it is good that people are being bold enough to speak about this, but not enough. But at least we can give some justice to the women who have been speaking about for 20 years but were not heard.
About a generation, an entire generation in this region living on the edge is how you've described it, either in conflict or having just come out of conflict, living in a state of turmoil. Is gender equality, are women's rights even possible in this kind of landscape?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if we look to the past and we look at the failures of revolution, the history of the failures of revolution, and we look at the history of the failures of national liberation movements across the region, whether we're talking about North Africa or the Levant, we see that one of the causes of those failures is a reluctance or even almost a violent reluctance to create parity with the rights of women alongside the rights of everyone else. And again, I think our speakers have underscored that this evening. Now, a problem that, of course, the region experiences is the fragility of the state, and therefore the proliferation of conflict. And we can see that with Syria, we can see that with Yemen, we can see that in the past with Lebanon, we can see that in the Palestinian territories, in Algeria, and Libya and elsewhere. And what we do see in those cases is that insecurity affects women in greater proportion than it does men. Now, I'm not saying that men aren't affected by insecurity as a result of these conflicts, but we see that with the increasing propensity for civil conflicts, that women and children become the greatest number of victims, and that the structures of support, including the structures of support from well-meaning international organizations and donors, contributes to the failure to allow this transition from victimhood being visited upon the citizens of the region, and in particular women and children, to allow that transition to survivorship, as we've heard about this evening. So there are structural problems there, and also there are predispositions by leaderships within the region to publicly debate and lift the national discourse to include the discussion of these issues.
Which brings us back to the survey that you made mention of, this survey carried out by the UN of attitudes. And if attitudes aren't going to change, then nothing will in a hurry, and you can't really legislate for attitudes, can you? How do attitudes change favorably in this kind of environment?
They can. Okay. القضية الأساسية
The main issue for women is that of a culture issue. As an expert in the committee of putting an end to discrimination against women, the fifth paragraph of this agreement underlines the importance of changing the cultural stereotypes that belittles the role of women in the society. This can be adjusted because it is the government that controls the educational system in the country and the public discourse. So, for example, let's see what's happening in Saudi Arabia right now. There is a change in the discourse that was 100% against women. Now we find the leadership changed, and we find that the discourse is so much in favor of women, which means that the government decides everything.
Out of a commitment to gender parity, or is this an economic consideration?
No, I think it's a political strategy. It's a political strategy. If women gain, let's applaud that.
So it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. Whatever happens, we want to empower women. Like, for instance, and I strongly believe that in some part of the Arab region, women were really downtrodden. This is the time to empower women. If it's part of a strategy of to appear modern in front of the whole world, let's be it. The most important thing, leave women to be. Empower women. For women to be imprisoned in unable to work, unable to do anything, is not acceptable. This is why I believe the importance of working with international organizations. This is why I highlight the importance of engaging with UN, with the CEDAW committee, with other human rights committees. It's very important to keep the pressure on to empower women. Without this engagement with the international committee and the coalition building between women themselves, between women's organizations, we will not be able to advance. Again, what I said, the most important thing that came out of the Arab Spring was the women visibility and agency. It's being able, as my colleagues here said, to speak up about the harassment, to speak up about the marginalization, to stand up and say, this is my right. I have the right to defend myself. I have the right for this. This is our right. Gender equality is our right.
Thank you very much. Perfect moment to open up to you. Any of you have some questions or comments that you'd like to put? Okay, let's start, shall we? So the lady in the front with the blue scarf. Will you tell us your name and where you're from? Okay, whatever you're most comfortable with.
My name is Dr. Hala Al-Ahmadi from Doha Family Institute, DIFI, Doha Family International Institute. My question is going to be posed in Arabic to Maya. My question is about your intervention. Don't you think that masculinity as an ideology, it is an ideology? It is a repressive power to women only, not to women only, but to men also. In my opinion, masculinity represses men and women alike. So this vision is very simplistic when we talk about men as an absolute enemy. I hoped that you maybe talked about the cost of violence on men. What is the cost of violence on men? So it is not just a matter of privileges, no, it is a loss to men as well. So losses to men is not only gains to women. It is not necessarily gains to women. In my opinion, I think there is some simplification in the vision that says that masculinity is repressive to women only. It is repressive to men and women alike. And when we try to find solutions of how to overcome such an ideology, I think we have to see that the price is paid by both. And from my work, I dealt and worked with women who are survivors and men who have battered those women. And so many of them used to say that we want to stop because we know we are hurting them. So how can we solve this matter? How can we find solutions to this matter? And we should take into account both men and women. I think that the intervention was very simplistic. It is not a matter of simplifying or being simplistic. I want to underline something that is a reality. I do not want to beautify or alleviate a situation that exists. I had 7 minutes. I could not talk about masculinity and all its impact on the community. Of course, men are impacted as well when we talk about gender roles and duties that are shouldered by both, how these roles restrict both men and women. Therefore, there must be repercussions on men. Yes, repercussions are on men and women. Masculinity, it targets who in the family? It harasses who in the family? It discriminates against who in politics? It discriminates against who when a woman is not allowed to walk in the street without being assaulted? So we as women in Lebanon, we have had a number of women who have been killed. 8 women have been killed as a result of domestic violence. Can we very simply say that masculinity is harmful to both men and women alike and equally? Why would I then talk about gender equality? Why should we have these programs if there is no particularity to what comes to our position or situation as women? Yes, there is a particular situation here. I'm not talking about men as enemies. I didn't do that. I talked about men as challenges that we face as groups and women and men in our own spaces. And I just try to voice the challenges and questions that are being posed in our circles. But when we say there is no impact on men, no, there is impact on men. And as a human being who can go beyond the stereotypes that has been imposed on him by the community. So do men get killed in the name of honor? No, we have to be objective and read what is taking place on the ground. We have to be very clear in our description of what is taking place. And this is what I meant by what I said. And maybe this was relevant maybe to the problematic issue of how to work with men. We have to dismantle it. We have to look into it in detail. So I think this is a weapon in the hands of so many men. And there are so many men who prefer to be with us, to support us, but there are some other men who we do not like, we do not want them to be in our community, who use these weapons against us.
You to be brief, please. Time is not on our side. There's a lady in silver, and then behind you, 2 rows behind you, a lady with glasses. Could you be brief, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Amar, thank you very, very much for your very important and moving talk. I was fascinated by what you said about women political prisoners not being elevated to the level of heroes or heroines, if you will. And, you know, we often see women being elevated also for deeply sexist reasons sometimes.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I didn't hear you well, so I just will...
Sorry, I'm trying to be quick, so... So I wanted to thank you for your very moving talk and say that I was fascinated by what you said about female political prisoners not being elevated to that level of heroes of the nation, you know. But we see in some deeply sexist societies that this form of elevation does take place. So it's not always, you know, a sign of deeply respecting women either. So I was curious, I would love you to elaborate on that point just a little bit. And then, Shama, thank you very, very much for your talk on also journalism. And I was wondering about what prospects do women in Egypt have to become journalists, right? What are the barriers to entering that very vocal and critical profession? I'd be fascinated to hear about that. And then finally, Noor, as someone who's just, you know, observing Qatari society from the outside very much still, I don't see really the liberation that you talk about, but I'm particularly interested in the position of migrant workers here. So not the Qataris themselves, but what about women who come here, you know, to find employment? I mean, surely the situation is really dire.
In what way?
Okay, sorry, and then just on the, if you will allow me, just on the Me Too
okay. Well,
thing,
I think
just very, very quickly, that just seems like a little bit incommensurate to me to compare the situation of someone like in Hollywood, like Reese Witherspoon, to someone in Syria at this point, right? Yeah. I think it's a glib comparison, frankly.
Okay. Do you want to start, Noor?
Let me say you said liberation, and what define liberation? I prefer to use empowerment. So I'm wearing abaya and sitting in here. Maybe I don't fit your description of a liberated woman, but I'm very empowered woman. It depends on the definition. I think Qatari women are very empowered. As Beverly said, in workforce, 49% of Qataris are working, and they're in all sectors. We have ministers. We now have 4 women in parliament, and looking to have more when we have the next elections. Women are everywhere. So you talk about guest workers and women. In what way do you want me to tackle that? Okay, I don't say Qatar is utopian. We still have, all of us, Qataris and non-Qataris, we have issues we want to put on the table and to talk about. But if you talk about, for instance, domestic workers and all that, Qatar has implemented so many changes in legislations and all that to make sure that it protects the rights of migrant workers. So the country is doing a lot to make sure that it meets the standards. What's important for us to recognize is that if there is progress, if from one day to another you see progress, we're on the right track. It's when things are stagnant, when you stop, then you have to worry. And I think in Qatar we see a lot of progress in all fronts, and this is very important.
Thank you, Noor. Maha, will you address that point then about female former detainees?
أنا إذا فهمت سؤالك صح لأنه حضرت السماعة.
You want to speak about the women, examples of women who did not suffer or not detained. Isn't this what you want to hear about? Definitely not all women in Syria had such a harsh experience. There are so many honorable positions for women in Syria. They don't need programs or support to begin again. In fact, even these women who were subjected to such a social pressure, I don't have time to speak about every girl that I saw and met. But I give you a simple example. One of the ladies that was released after my being released, and she met her and this woman went to an organization that is specialized in children education. So definitely not all of them need support, and
Could you be brief, please, because we really are running out of time.
Yeah, very quickly.
Working in media in Egypt in general is a very dangerous thing, whether for men or women. Egypt is classified as one of the most dangerous places to work for journalists. And lately there was a campaign about the latest detentions that were that the journalists were subject to. For example, you find that a young journalist woman who wants to begin this her life as a journalist, she was arrested because she wrote a small short report about the tramway. So I personally witnessed this experience. It was a very harsh experience. 2005, I was harassed and raped. But this does not make me stop. No, on the contrary, it makes me more determined to work on this in this field and to be a defender of human rights in general. And I think the examples that I am one of which are so many, we represent a good example for other women to work in journalism in Egypt.
With glasses. If you could stand up, please. Yeah, thanks.
My name is Rana Hindi. I'm a professor of economics from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. I would like to thank all the speakers for sharing your experiences, even if they were mostly negative. And I kind of, if you allow me, of course, I kind of blame you because you talked very much about those negative experiences without also showing how much progress we women in the Arab region have made so far. If I look at a country like Tunisia, which maybe is not represented in this panel, we can easily see the progress women have made in terms of women's rights, representation, even if, despite all that, on the economic side, women's labor force participation, the labor market, even in Tunisia, they remain very low. But on the other sides, on the other fronts, they have made a lot of progress. I come from Egypt as well, so I know very well what Shaima was talking about. But again, I can see also on other fronts that women have made a lot of progress, as you just said, on education and also in representation and others. So I'm just concerned that someone who is not from the region who would listen to such speaker would have that, impression that women's position and situation in the region is bad and is not moving, which is not really the case. But again, I thank you very much.
Shema, I think.
Okay. يمكن في الحقيقة افتكرتك تونسية.
I thought you were Tunisian, and I was saying that we are all in the Arab region, see Tunisia as the model that we would like to reach, maybe half of what they have achieved. There is a great deal of achievements have been made in the region, but particularly in Tunisia. So there are so many efforts that are being exerted by people in Tunisia in particular. Tunisia is advanced on this level because Tunisia has supported women. They have empowered women for a long period of time. They have enacted a number of laws that have contributed to the empowerment of women. They have given the opportunity to women's movements. Women movements in Tunisia are maybe the greatest and the strongest in the region. We have so many activist women that are very, very strong. We have the democratic movement of women is maybe stronger than the government itself. In Egypt, there is also a great deal of strife, but it is not up to the level that are being exerted by the different women organizations and demands made in Tunisia. We have a number of laws when it comes to combating harassment and representation in a number of authorities and political representation. This is only used as a show in international public opinion. We have a number of women that support the rights of women, such as Azza Sliman and other women. These are being oppressed as a result of their efforts. They have their properties confiscated. They are on travel ban also. And so they are being negative dealt with as a result of the achievements and successes they have made there.
Maha, if you could make your contributions really quick so we can get a few more questions in. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, there has been progress. I think, we pointed it out in terms of some of those basic indicators. And actually, I think you've made a very good point, and we should applaud the many, many women who have been responsible for that progress in partnership with men, but the women who've taken the initiative, who've campaigned, and who have been brave and courageous in achieving that progress. But I think we have to have a reality check here and maybe think about a new hashtag, which is, it's not enough. It's not good enough. Look at the realities, look at the facts. And the facts are, as I said, the facts are the facts. The gender gap is the worst in the region. The region, in terms of political participation, the data tells you it's delivering on the worst. In terms of the economic story, women, AHRD report, women have the potential to unlock the economic recovery of the region. And as Noor and the other speakers have pointed out, what were the structural factors driving the Arab uprisings? There were issues to do with economy and livelihoods and the security that livelihoods can deliver. I just want to make one quick point about whether it's glib to equate hashtag American film stars like Reese Witherspoon with the experiences of women in Syria. I don't think it's glib. I think that any woman or girl who is a victim, who is attacked, who is a victim of sexual harassment or violence, they experience that in a very powerful and damaging way. And so it's not glib to make that equation. And I think that the global nature of the campaign has created a space for us to acknowledge that. What is perhaps annoying is that the way in which perhaps some white neoliberal feminists or white Western neoliberal women have attempted to hijack what was originally owned grassroots campaign by women of color, and that's annoying, and that's a glib conflation. Thank you.
And Maha, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. هلا بالنسبة ل يعني الوضع
about the situation in Syria as it is in a war situation. That's why one cannot give a lot of examples that are positive, but and also the time we had is very limited. I can't give the idea on both sides, but definitely when we speak about negative, we should also speak about something that's encouraging. As for this group that I talked about, just the very presence in that place to continue their lives represented 25 success stories, in fact, by themselves.
Male voice today, the gentleman in the front, please. No, sorry, the gentleman with glasses here. No, sorry. Sorry.
In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate, may God pray on Prophet Muhammad and his companions and all his followers. First of all, I would like to salute women as a woman, as a wife, as a daughter, as a grandmother and a mother, etc., in their International Day 2018. And now I address Ms. Noor about the Arab Spring. This Arab Spring that was designed by the International Mason movement, which is a Jewish one, and this organization is in occupied Palestine in Jaffa, and has imposed its conditions that people should not follow the instructions of the Quran. There's also the Persian intervention and Israel also intervened to expand their borders from the Nile to the Euphrates, and USA, which is part of the Zionist lobby. As for what was said about the marriage of minors, this is something that is within some of the schools of thought in Islam in Iraq, and Islam has given them the right, all the rights for such kind of women. As for harassment issues, we as participants in the conference should deal with this issue, define it, and propose solutions. And in my humble opinion, some women walk almost naked in the streets, and this invites the young men to harass them and to attack them. And in fact, sometimes I don't want to use the word specific. As for a woman that covers herself well, she will not give any room and would not encourage one to harass her. A woman should wear the dresses that does not reveal their nude bodies. And as for the plurality, this is something in our religion, in our Malik had four wives and 300 concubines, and Prophet Muhammad had 11 wives, divorced two of them, and continued. Can I interject there and ask Noor to respond as briefly as possible? Sorry. Just give me 2 minutes, he says. Just 2 minutes, because we have about 8 people who would also like to speak. Would you like to respond, Noor?
حضرتك ذكرت أشياء كثيرة.
He referred to so many things. He spoke of so many things. He has the right to speak, but we also have the right to differ with him. I would like to say that nobody has the right to harass women under any pretext. Any pretext not acceptable. Harassment is harassment by itself, and there should be no specifications or any justifications. And I think it's a big injustice to us all as women, Muslim women, and to our religion, that our religion is used to justify women harassment. The Holy Quran calls and orders men to look aside. Look aside means that even if a woman is not well dressed, this means that Islam orders the man to look aside. Islam does not say that she's not well dressed, you can attack her. So it is high time to
نتكلم فيها لما نرجع مرة ثانية عن الثقافة والكلام كل ما تكلمنا عن المرأة.
Culture. When we speak about culture, everyone says we respect a woman as a mother, as a wife, as a sister. A woman is a human being and should be respected, not because she is a wife or a mother, but because she is a human being. The main point, the basic point that we speak about in this International Day for Women is that we have the right of being respected as human rights. Human rights are women's rights, and we are human.
Whether we are wives, whether we are daughters, we are human beings and need to be respected. This is why I insist again. We need to change culture. We need to change the discord. We should not be accepting to be put down for any reason.
Thank you. The lady behind, the red cardigan, please, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to go through in order. If you could be really brief, please, we can squeeze in a few more.
Thank you very much. Nahid Mohammed Hassan أنا عالمة نفس. So, in fact, I think that we need a woman theory in the Middle East and Africa to represent us. And we need some mechanisms for a woman action that stems out of our culture and our realities. And continuing what Hala said, are we in animosity or enemies of women, or are we together to fight their privileges? What's important to understand what is masculinity, and it's important to have the mechanism. As Hala said, this is an ideology that men and women suffer from, and in fact. We have an experience in Sudan about women circumcision. We have been working against women circumcision for years and years, but in vain. But we discovered that the reason is that even the women themselves want that, because this is a way to blackmail men and to defy him when they are married. So we must understand this within masculinity and sexuality. Thank you.
Can I ask
Noha.
And the lady just behind there, yeah. And then I'm afraid to say that's it for this evening.
I was just saying you can take 3 or 4 questions at a time. So,
do you have a question, Noha? No, not so. We have one more. Okay, the lady there with her hand up, and that lady there.
شكرا دكتورة ابتسام.
Dr. Ibtisam Smadi, I would like to salute you all, men and women, today, International Women's Day. It is very beautiful to remember the strives of Syrian women. I would like to thank Ms. Maya, I apologize, she says, thank you for what you have given in this regard. I would like to say, as Mahmoud Darwish, the poet, said, while preparing for your breakfast, think of others. You should not forget about the food of pigeons. So we hope that we're going to have a statement issued by the United Nations regarding what women in Eastern Ghouta is subjected to. She is being subjected to destruction, to atrocities. Homes are being destroyed over their heads. They are subjected to internationally prohibited and banned gases, and this strife, the strife of women, is being subjected and targeted. Women, when they leave detention centers, they leave the detention centers as perpetrators, as somebody who is accused, not as heroes, similar to men. So from my experience as a former member of parliament, I would like to say that up to now, despite all what has been made and achieved by women, all the positives that have been expressed by one of the panelists, up to now, our communities, Arab communities in particular, and Eastern communities in general, they do not have any institutional recognition of the achievements of women. All what we have, in actual fact, is that we have the traditional discourse that blocks the mind and body of women, and modern discourse that made of women a manufactured good or goods, and has opened the floor for traditional discourses to go ahead and defend women. They have tried to defend it as gatekeepers. Those backward men, they try to defend women based on this old heritage. And the second kind of woman is a woman who is being self-distorted, facing difficulties, and so on and so forth. So men always like women who are yes women, who would say yes to him. And here the question to be posed, why do we fear the brain, the mind, the work of women? This is the question that should be posed and that we should look into. I personally, I am with the discourse that does not make of men enemies. We are the outcome of a heritage, and we, men and women, should liberate our communities, our societies from all negatives, and we should shed light on the positives. We, in this day and age, there is an outcry by all men and women, intellectuals, and Roger Garudi is one of them.
Thank you so much. Finally, the lady at the back with her hand up. And if you could be brief, that would be most appreciated.
I do have a genuine question. You mentioned at the beginning about women earning the right to vote, but it was some women. And one of the things we've learned from kind of first and second wave feminism is that it was very much the privileged, the elite women, the white women, and then there's been so much discussion about intersectionality now that those are being excluded. Do you believe that the feminism that's coming up in the Middle East at the moment, you talked about the need to organize, build alliances, agree minimum agenda, can be inclusive, can go through to the level of the domestic workers? All of us here have some level of privilege, and that many of us have help from other women that have even less rights than we do. I know Qatar's just last year introduced a domestic workers law for the first time that they were excluded before. So there is some progress. But do you see realistically with the fights that are going on that it's going to be learning from the mistakes of the past, or will it still be kind of the elite women that gets their equality first, or can we actually be inclusive?
Maya, do you want to?
Yes, I just thought she was asking about Qatar. I can give you my opinion on this, is that in Lebanon, it's not the case. It's not inclusive at all. Most of the Lebanese population, for example, can support us in our fight against family violence against women. Nevertheless, they don't support our fight to end the exploitation of domestic workers, which is very much linked to another structure that is very oppressive. And in the Arab world, that's the kafala system. And I don't think there's any intention to remove or dismantle the kafala system, which I call modern slavery. And this will keep the liberation of domestic workers and migrant women like really far ahead. So I don't think I think there's more awareness about the intersection of our struggles as women, but not enough at this stage in Lebanon, for example, to include domestic workers or other laborers, female laborers in the marketplace. And don't forget that these women are employers. The women in Lebanon are the employers. So on one hand, they are the victims of a system. On another hand, they are actually perpetrating the abuse. So this will take more time, in my belief.
Okay, there is a lady here who's most insistent, and she's written something which I can now read. Yemen, we've got to hear from you, please. Can you stand up? Can you maybe just raise your voice and quickly?
The good news that I have from Yemen is that, yes, I come from a country that I cannot issue my ID and my passport by myself. My father has to come with me, and even my little brother to issue my passport. But the good news is that now women are pioneering. They are the directors of, out of 3,000 national NGOs in Yemen, 2,000 are directed by women. So this is a good step that women in Yemen are advocating for themselves. And to the structural violence that Beverly has raised, we are the women who are going to change the structural violence that is directed to us. So this is the good news that I have from Yemen. Thank you.
I thank you all very much indeed. I'm afraid time's up. That's it. Thank you for being such an energetic audience. And thank you, of course, to our panel, our wonderful panel coming from all over the region and, of course, from the UK. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.